Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market shares fell as a weak performance on Wall Street overnight, as well as a slew of disappointing manufacturing data from across the globe and an intensifying trade dispute between the US and China certainly curbed risk appetite today. Now, on the continent, Africa's major markets are closed for Eid celebrations, but South Africa's JSE saw banks and retailers falling sharply today on news that the country's GDP contracted by 3.2% in the first quarter. However, we did see some rand hedge and resource stocks boosting the bourse today. Now, also coming up on the show, South Africa's economy contracts by more than 3%, the worst level in a decade. Zambia rolls out a power rationing program to cope with a deficit of more than 200 megawatts daily. And President Trump promises UK a fair trade deal after Brexit. Well, let's kick off today's show in South Africa, where latest data shows the economy has contracted by 3.2% in the first quarter of 2019, the worst drop the country has seen since the wake of the global financial crisis. Now, the shortfall is attributed to the quarterly contraction in the manufacturing sector, which we saw drop by 8.8%. The rand also slid about 1.4%, trading at 14.64 to the dollar today. Trading economists had previously forecasted GDP at 1.7%, at a 1.7% drop quarter on quarter, but grew 0.7% year on year. Now, the plunge wiped out about 3.82 billion US dollars off the nominal GDP, putting it at $81.8 billion at the end of March. Moreover, the contraction has created concern of a slowing global economy and lack of domestic business confidence, undercutting the expected economic recovery in 2019. Well, let's get some more insight into South Africa's economic outlook from CGTN Sumitra Naidu. She joins us now in Johannesburg. Sumitra, great to have you on the show as always. Now, though we've seen those data points, the data pointing to weak mining and factory activity in the country, analysts are saying this poor showing is the result of a combination of power cuts, which of course are weighing on key sectors in the economy, as well as a slowing global economy and of course waning domestic business confidence. So, Sumitra, is this the consensus in the country right now?
So, Uche, the electricity shortages that we experienced earlier this year was the worst since 2008, and that, of course, caused much of the big declines we saw in those numbers today in agriculture, in mining, in manufacturing. The secondary sector was extremely hard hit. The construction sector, which was already declining and shedding jobs, also suffered. But yes, there does seem to be a consensus that it's a combination of factors that led to those weaker than expected numbers. Business confidence has been weak for some time now, and that's largely because of political uncertainty, the economic environment, all the red tape that's still hindering, especially the small and medium business sector. Here too, electricity is a problem. You have supply issues on the one side, and then you have rising costs. Eskom is trying to shore up its massive debt. It's also running short operationally, and both business and consumers have had to bear the brunt of higher tariffs. So you're seeing higher input costs as well, let alone the government guarantees and loans to the utility. We've also had petrol price hikes. We are at record highs at the fuel pumps, so transport costs have also gone up. The trade war between the US and China, we've got Brexit as well. It's also having a huge impact just on trade. If you break down those numbers today, we also saw a 26% decline in exports. And we're being warned that if that trade war escalates, South Africa will be severely impacted. Uche?
Quite right, Sumitra. And of course, many did feel that after these recent elections, which we just had, Ramaphosa's economic reforms would begin to pay off for the country. So looking at the factors surrounding this GDP performance, are we seeing investors, ratings agencies, and of course, South Africans confident this will be the case going forward?
Well, you know, there was so much optimism when Cyril Ramaphosa was elected ANC president in December 2017. Then there was a sigh of relief that the Zuma era was over. After Ramaphosa took over as president of the country, there was a lot of hope that things will turn around. But that soon faded. There's still hope and expectation. You know, the rating agencies agreed to give the new administration time to make the changes, to get this economy back on track. But the challenge is massive, and we must remember that the destruction of this economy and institutions went on for years. So it's not going to be a quick fix. And while there are some areas where changes can be affected, the president has to deal with his party and the unions. And this is in the area of state-owned entities. The constant bailing out of these entities needs to stop because they're piling on the debt. It's something that the rating agencies have been warning against for a while now. We still have room before the next ratings review. I think there's still some positivity out there that Ramaphosa and his new cabinet will steer the ship back to safety. But it needs to happen very quickly. The Rand's reaction is an indication that not everyone is convinced that this economy will get back on track as soon as they're hoping for it to do so. Uche?
Well, speaking of the Rand, Sumitra, given these GDP numbers that we've seen, is it certain we'll see a rate cut from the central bank soon? And certainly, how would that impact on the currency and other factors such as inflation going forward?
Well, you know, I don't think it's certain at this stage, but some economists are saying that there is room for the Reserve Bank to make a decision. Inflation is under control and well within the 3 to 6% target range. There was already a discussion at the last MPC meeting 2 weeks ago. Two members out of the MPC wanted a rate cut. So, you know, the committee was divided on that decision. And of course, the bank decided to remain cautious and kept rates on hold. But the bank, you know, warning that there's only so much that monetary policy can do. You know, in that statement from the Reserve Bank governor, there was a call to government to urgently make the structural changes that this economy needs. You know, the worry for the Reserve Bank is that should the geopolitics worsen, the trade war in particular, if there's an escalation, we could very quickly see inflation going up because you know, of any negative development. It will definitely weaken the Rand significantly. So the bank was expecting a really weak GDP number. I don't think as bad as the number that we saw today, but it did lower its forecast for growth this year down to 1% from 1.3%. It's not completely certain that they will cut rates, but we did see the banking sector taking a huge hit after those GDP numbers came out today. Financials were down almost 3% on the day, and all of the big banks lost on the threat that there could be an interest rate cut.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll certainly be watching. As always, thanks, Sumitra, for your insights. That's Sumitra Naidu joining us there in Johannesburg. Now, of course, the race for first place is taking center stage as the world watches the US and China battle it out. Global markets have seesawed in the last few weeks, and investors are worried as, of course, the US suspended Huawei's NTT license for about 90 days. While President Donald Trump is also pushing US allies to sever ties with the Chinese tech giant. Here's Sumitra again, taking a look at the impact of Trump's latest outburst.
Huawei has become the second largest smartphone manufacturer in the world, pushing Apple to third position. And the Chinese tech giant is the first 5G network provider. None of this seems to be sitting well with the US administration.
This is almost a competition for the next wave of technology. Who will own that? Who will long-term benefit from it? And of course, I mean, how do you reconcile those interests? That's very difficult to do, even through what should be taking place as more constructive negotiations.
The spat is already affecting smaller economies. The Reserve Bank has warned of severe consequences for South Africa should this fight worsen. Africa is one of Huawei's strongest markets for phones. Technology, too, is growing and important for both Huawei and its customers. Thousands of businesses rely on Huawei's technology infrastructure.
So Huawei has a lot more than just smartphones. Most South Africans recognize Huawei as a smartphone manufacturer. They actually make a lot of the equipment that powers telecommunications. the cellular base stations. They make a lot of the servers and processors that move calls and internet traffic around. In fact, a third of all the people online on the planet use Huawei technology.
I think this is deeply concerning and deeply destabilizing for the global economy. That's problematic. Where we sit here in South Africa, this is from a market's perspective as well. It's very turbulent. It's a kind of, we sense because of his actions, of his frictions, his rising temperature, if you will, of engagement, there's a sense that there's risk on as opposed to risk off from the global economy. That's something we really certainly don't need right now.
Huawei may feel the impact of being caught in the middle of this techno-trade war, but the stakes are higher for the US should China decide to play hardball. Sumitra Nadev, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's move on to Senegal now. A group of opposition politicians in the country have called for an investigation into two major offshore gas blocks, which are run by oil and gas company BP. Now, a recent investigation report has exposed alleged fraud involving President Macky Sall's brother, Aliou Sall. Now, BBC recently published an investigation alleging that BP agreed to pay Timis Corporation, which is owned by tycoon Frank Timis, around $10 billion in royalty payments for its stake in those blocks. Now, it also alleges that Timis secretly paid about $250,000 to Agritrans, which is a company run by Aliou Sall. Timis is also alleged to have given $1.5 million in salary and $3 million in shares in Timis companies to Sall for his work in Petrotim, which of course originally owned those blocks. Now, President Macky Sall's brother has been defending himself following these allegations.
According to the program, the purchase of shares from Frank Timis by BP is supposed to have reached $250 million, around 150 billion CFA. I would like to say that I am not aware of such a transaction. I have never met a single BP representative, and I consider that if there was such an agreement, it would concern only those two entities, and Aliou Sall has nothing to do with such an agreement. I have never received, either directly or indirectly, any payment from Timis Corporation via Agritrans. Agritrans is a company which has been existing since 2011 and which, as with all Senegalese companies, is listed on the APIX site. There is therefore no will to hide its existence. It no longer is active since I am once again working for the government of Senegal. The BBC claims are totally false, and my council will follow up on this.
Nous allons immédiatement et sans délai.
We will immediately and without delay lodge a complaint against the BBC. Internationally, it will be London consultancy that will deal with it, and at a local level, we will do it ourselves and as fast as possible, because Article 258 of the Penal Code says all allegations or all attacks on the owner and the consideration of others is defamation.
And on that note, let's take a look at our other corporate headlines today. Kenyan-listed insurance firm Britam has written off another $15.5 million from its investment in mortgage lender Housing Finance Group Kenya. Now, this has raised the book losses from the investment to $36.5 million in the last 3 years. The company says its financial performance had been affected by the HF impairment and the general decline in the market. And South African retail chain Shoprite has terminated an agreement to buy back deferred shares held by its chairman, Christo Weiss. The failure is credited to the lack of support from shareholders. Now, this deal would have significantly curbed Weiss's influence in the company and simplified the firm's voting structure. Meanwhile, South African telecom firm MTN Group's biggest shareholder is pushing for changes at the company to avoid regulatory, legal and political disputes. This has contributed to a cut in its share price by more than half over the past 4 years. The Public Investment Corporation raised its stake to 26% and called for the resignation of Chairman Phuthuma Nhleko in May. This resulted in the appointment of more politically connected directors. And lastly, Apple has launched a sign-in with Apple function to rival Facebook and Google web login accounts. This draws a contrast with rivals by stressing protection of users' information. The company also looks to enforce control of location tracking by creating a system which randomly generates an email for users to sign in or third-party applications. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we're heading to a short break now. Here's a look at what's still to come. Zambia rolls out a power rationing program to cope with a deficit of more than 200 megawatts daily. And Angola seeks ways to diversify its economy from oil to beat crude price pressures.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche Okoronkwo reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Well, let's head to Zambia now. The country has started rationing electricity to non-mining businesses. Now, the move is expected to hurt industrial production and commercial services in the country. Of course, Zambia began rationing power to address a daily electricity deficit of about 273 megawatts. Mining industry sources said the electricity rationing had not affected the sector, but it was likely to if the situation worsened. Well, Zambia's Chamber of Commerce and Industry has said the power rationing would push up production costs as firms switch to other forms of energy. The Chamber's president said firms that cannot afford to switch to alternative sources of electricity like diesel power may be forced to cut output and lay off workers. Well, let's delve further into Zambia's decision and, of course, the current state of power supply in Africa. We're joined by Ted Blom. He's a partner at Mining and Energy Advisors SA. Very great to see you, Mr. Blom. Now, let's start off with Zambia's decision. Now, despite the impact that this could have on industry and commerce in the country, Zambia's state power utility, ZESCO, says it basically has no choice but to ration electricity for about 4 hours daily. Or they say the Kariba Dam will drain to minimum operating level by November. What are your thoughts on ZESCO's move?
Okay, so I completely understand the situation. And the background to that is that for the past 40-odd years, the whole of the South African power pool, including Zambia, has been fed power relatively cheaply by the South African power utility Eskom. However, as you will well know now, that in the past couple of years, Eskom has its own trials and tribulations and is no longer in a position to export power. In fact, we had power rationing today, seemingly unofficially in several suburbs in Johannesburg and Pretoria. So to the extent that Eskom no longer can supply and supplement the power that's generated locally by hydro in Zambia, there's no other solution to the problem. They need to eventually generate their own power and wean themselves off the Eskom teat.
Well, looking at the overall power sector in Africa, it certainly seems like power supply is worsening. As you mentioned, in South Africa, we're seeing Eskom struggling with capacity shortages, which of course is pushing the economy towards recession now. In Nigeria, unreliable electricity is costing the country about $29 billion a year. Now, is Africa's power situation worsening? As a an energy expert, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so I think the power situation is very territorial. But overall, I'd say that more countries in Africa today are struggling with power shortages than maybe has been the case in the past 30 or 40 years. And that is primarily due to the inheritance of colonial infrastructure, which has been run down. I know that in Zimbabwe, for instance, the Wangi power station has been terribly run down and is in dire need of repairs and maintenance, which hasn't been done for the past 30 years. We have similar situations in Mozambique, which has also been totally reliant on South African power, other than for the Cobora Bassa hydro scheme up in the north. And similar situations in Botswana, which also now has to wean itself from the South African grid, as well as Namibia. So in the southern part of Africa, there is a dire situation as far as power shortages are concerned, and I'm led to believe that a very similar situation is taking place in West Africa, along Nigeria, Ghana, Ivory Coast, that axis, where major power plants are also years behind, and there's been a lot of squabbling about the right to, for instance, gas in Ghana, and that has caused more than a 10-year delay in their power projects. Similar in Uganda, and then in the east, I believe in Kenya, power rationing has been an ongoing issue on and off for the past 10 to 15 years, I'm led to believe.
So it's quite a dire situation given the picture you just painted. Now, given these realities, how do you think we can have Africa's governments balance the interests of electricity producers and, of course, consumer and business in order to ensure efficient and affordable electricity supply going forward?
Okay, so I believe firmly and fervently, and I think the research will back me, that access to electricity is an enabler of economic and GDP growth. Without that, there's just no further growth, and in fact stagnation and unemployment will proceed. So I think the availability of cheap and readily available reliable power is a sine qua non for growth in the future and for stemming the unemployment. And the only way to do that, I really believe, because most of the African governments are really threadbare in terms of finances and reserves, the only way to do that is to open up the grid to private participation and let the cheapest man rule the market.
Well, unfortunately, we have to leave our discussion there, but great to have you on the show, Mr. Blom. Of course, that was Ted Blom, who is a partner at Mining and Energy Advisors SA. Well, let's shift our focus now to Angola. The country's oil and gas sector has been the primary driver of its economy for many years now. With that reliance comes a dependency on commodity prices. Well, realizing that, the Angolan president and his advisors have been hard at work in order to mitigate these risks associated with those fluctuating prices. Here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola reporting from the first oil and gas conference held in Luanda.
Angolan President João Lourenço has made several fundamental changes to the economy by way of presidential decrees and changes to laws making the country more attractive to potential investors.
Senegal and all other private oil companies will from now have the right to research, assess, develop, produce and sell natural gas in domestic market and export, as well as having specific and longer periods for exploration and production if compared to that of crude oil.
Multinationals are sitting up and taking notice.
From my point of view, I think petroleum is a dynamic sector of the country. Especially when I look at this event, I can see a lot of chance, especially like international oil company and the national oil company in Angola. They can show us some really facts of the operation and the future in Angola.
While the focus is on the oil and gas sector, there's serious technology behind the day-to-day operations. It's a technology that has other applications.
Angola is definitely ready with the new presidency and the direction they're going. It's far more open to business, and the desire to catch up with the technology and improve their industry and their lifestyle is definitely in the direction we're seeing for the rest of Africa and the world. And where we've applied our digital transformation globally, especially in the oil and gas industry, as well as building smart cities, we're seeing that it's ready.
The reforms announced by the country's president in recent months are starting to gain traction. There appears to be a real determination to get the economy back on track.
They have done some really good things, and I think I've been around Africa, I've seen a lot of things, I've seen a lot of market rhetoric. Here you've seen more action and more substance happening, and I think that's what really defines this market.
The oil and gas sector is a key sector in the Angolan economy, and it will lead to diversification throughout the country and economic growth. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Luanda, Angola.
Now let's shift focus. Spanish delivery firm Glovo has been expanding its footprint across Africa since it landed in 2018. The company has raised about $169 million that will partly go towards growing its African footprint and expanding its delivery portfolio. Now the firm, which formally launched its operations in Kenya in January, says it will use the additional capital from its fourth round of fundraising to expand its delivery categories beyond food to include groceries, drinks, gifts, laundry, pharmacy products, and courier services. Now, the latest financing round was led by European venture capital firm Lakestar and Drake, which of course operates a franchise of US pizza firm Papa John's in Spain and Chile. Well, Glovo's total funds raised thus far stand at about $322 million. Let's get a sense of the company's strategy for the continent. We are joined by Rodrigo Allier. He's Glovo's regional general manager for EMEA, that's Europe, Middle East and Africa. You're very welcome to the show, sir. Now, you entered Africa's market in 2018, as we mentioned. Since then, we've seen quite an aggressive push to expand across the continent, quite an aggressive development strategy. You launched in Morocco, Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire now. What did you see in Africa's delivery market that has prompted this aggressive expansion across the continent?
So what we see and what we are actually seeing is actually a perfect product fit for Glovo and eventually in the Africa market. Why? Because at the end we are a global technology platform that allow every user, every customer to order whatever they want, wherever, whenever, no? So I mean, bringing that convenience to African homes, that was something that was happening as a surge demand happening in the Africa market.
Right. Was it Africa's demographics also that attracted you? What was specific? Because you're a Spanish company.
Yeah, so at the end it's like we see like a huge potential in Africa, and we knew that it was the right time to land now into this market, to start investing and to start growing, because we know it's a market that eventually in the food delivery industry or the on-demand delivery, this is something that is going to get disrupted. It was the right moment to enter.
Now, of course, you say Glovo is a networking platform. Basically, users can order, deliver, and send any product. Give us a sense of your business model. Is it similar to Jumia, companies like Jumia? Are you offering Africa a new product that they haven't seen before?
That's a very good point. We're an on-demand delivery platform, which means that you can order whatever you want, as I was saying at the beginning. This means we are not only food, it's also groceries, it's also gifts, whatever you need in a matter of minutes. We usually deliver in an average of 45 minutes to your doorstep. No? So we focus a lot of that convenience, that instantaneous convenience, to deliver whatever you need in a matter of minutes. So,
well, go ahead.
No, it's fine.
Okay. Well, give me a sense of the experience you've had in the markets you've entered so far. We talked about Morocco, you're in Kenya now, Cote d'Ivoire as well. In terms of services, in terms of the partnerships you've made, in terms of partnering with local suppliers and retailers, what has been your experience in Africa?
So these markets are very unique and are very different from each other, no? So which means that from a global strategy approach, we always need to bring a local strategy. This means that, for example, talking about suppliers, restaurants, or grocery chains that we're partnering with, it's very important to partner with the right restaurants. For example, we always need to make sure we address local demand with relevant content, relevant restaurants for customers in these countries. No, eventually, for example, now in Kenya, the fact of having Pizza Inn or Chicken Inn, some restaurants that are relevant for Kenyan consumers, is something that is very important for us.
Are you seeing are you adopting a different strategy in these different African countries?
Of course, we need to localize, so we tend to localize the message, and depending on the stage of the market, we take a different approach. When I talk about localizing, for example, here in Kenya, we just launched a new television ad, which is with very local message, which I think is working and resonating quite well with customers.
Well, unfortunately, we have to leave it there, but many thanks for joining us in the studio. That was Rodrigo Alier, he's Global's Regional General Manager for EMA, right. Well, let's move on to Egypt now. The country has been ranked first in Africa and 8th in the world for its fish farming industry, and that's after its annual fish production reached about 1.8 million tons. Now, Egypt's Minister of Agriculture and Land Reclamation, Ez El-Din Abu State, basically says the country is in the process of constructing the largest fish farm in the Middle East. Well, CGTN's Yasser Hakim looks at the fishing industry and its benefits for the country's economy.
The fisheries industry has seen an upheaval in the last 3 years. A number of fish farms have been established, pushing production up.
Production is now 1.8 million tons per year. 80% of it is produced through fish farms and 20% from natural fishing. We export 35,000 tons and import about 300,000 tons of salmon, shrimp, and other types not produced here.
One of the largest fish farms is the Ghalioun Lake Fishery in partnership with China. The first phase on a 4,000 acres from a total 20,000 acres. The first phase is producing 3,000 tons of fish per cycle and 5,000 tons of shrimps per cycle. Khalid Ahmed is a member of the team establishing another mega project to be open soon and to be the largest in the Middle East.
It is a 17,000-acre fish farm in East Port Said. It will produce 25 to 30,000 tons of shrimp per cycle. Along with Ghalioun Fishery in full capacity, they will employ more than 15,000 workers and will make Egypt nearly self-sufficient in shrimp and save on huge import costs.
Scientists are also working with China to increase production per acre. The target is to produce 9 to 11 tons of fish per acre, up from the current 3 to 5 tons. With the new projects, the officials' plans is that within the next 3 years, the exports of fish and chips would more than double, creating more hard currency revenue for the developing economy. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's move on now to the first China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo, which will be held in central China at the end of this month. China's Ministry of Commerce says about 53 countries have confirmed they will take part so far. Trade between China and Africa stood at just over $200 billion last year. And of course, China is Africa's largest trading partner. And Chinese cumulative investment on the continent has now surpassed $46 billion. Well, the expo will be held in the city of Changsha from June 27th to the 29th. It is expected to enhance the bilateral trade exchange.
当前和未来这个一段时间里面，这个落实8大行动。
The Belt and Road Initiative is our guiding outline, and we intend to carry out the 8 actions put forward by President Xi. Therefore, holding the first China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo is a top priority. In the face of numerous and complex changes in the international system, China will stick to the main theme of cooperative development.
Well, you're watching Global Business Africa. Let's head into a quick break. Still to come. President Trump promises UK a fair trade deal after Brexit. And Qatar transforms deserts to meet its food needs after regional blockade.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Here's a quick recap of today's top headlines. Sudan's military leaders are now planning for elections within the next 9 months. This comes after Monday's violence where armed security forces stormed a protest camp in the capital, Khartoum. Now, a section of Sudan's opposition has rejected the new plan by the country's military authorities. Negotiations for the transition to a civilian government have broken down, and the Transitional Military Council now says all existing agreements with the protest groups have been cancelled. And Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta has promised to push for more women to occupy positions of power, keep all girls in school, tackle child marriage, and end female genital mutilation. He was speaking at the opening of the world's biggest gender equality conference on Monday. He told delegates there attending the Women Deliver conference in Vancouver, Canada, that Kenya would make it compulsory for parents to send all children to primary and secondary school to boost opportunities and empower girls to be future leaders. And dozens of illegal migrants from Africa are stranded at the Tunisian port of Zarzis. They were rescued off the coast of Sfax in Tunisia over the weekend. Now, authorities are demanding for support before accepting these migrants. This follows an influx of migrants from neighboring Libya in recent months. And that's a recap of today's headlines. Let's head on to the international stage. U.S. President Donald Trump and British Prime Minister Theresa May have co-hosted a business breakfast with Prince Andrew and American business leaders. Now, Trump said the United States will reach a substantial and fair deal with the UK after Brexit. He, of course, thanked the outgoing May for doing what he called a fantastic job. He also added that he didn't know May's timing, but she should stick around, quoting, "Now let's do this deal." Well, May is due to resign on Friday, but will remain in office until a successor has been chosen. Trump and May are expected to hold a news conference later. Now, the so-called special relationship between the U.S. and the UK has seen its fair share of turbulence, and that's under the Trump presidency. Let's take a look at some of the main points of dispute so far.
The Trump administration's strain on the special relationship between the two countries stands in stark contrast to a toast he made during his banquet with the Queen, a testament to supposedly enduring ties.
I offer a toast to the eternal friendship of our people, the vitality of our nations, and to the long-cherished and truly remarkable reign of Her Majesty, the Queen.
The eternal friendship is being challenged, due in part to Trump's aversion to multilateral agreements. An example is the Paris Climate Accord, which has seen a U.S. pullout but still counts the UK as a member. To Trump, America's exit from the deal was a victory.
I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris.
British House of Lords says these unilateral decisions are contrary to UK interests. But it doesn't just stop with climate change. Last year, Trump also pulled America out of the 2015 Iran nuclear agreement, a move UK Prime Minister Theresa May was clearly against.
I have been very clear in a number of conversations with the President of the United States about the belief of the United Kingdom that the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran, should stay.
The Trump administration has also been coming to a loggerheads with the UK directly. The UK's been pivoting toward China for trade ahead of Brexit. And American officials have been advising against this move. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo just last month during a visit to London said the U.S. may suspend sharing intelligence with the U.K. if they allow Huawei to build 5G networks in Britain.
This is a discussion that extends far beyond technology and trade.
The U.S. is opening its doors for a possible free trade agreement with the U.K. post-Brexit. It'll be a true test of the special relationship between the two countries and whether those ties can weather the storm. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
Meanwhile, talks between Mexico and the U.S. are underway in Washington after last week's threat by U.S. President Donald Trump to impose tariffs if the flow of illegal migrants isn't slowed. Well, Mexico's foreign minister is leading the negotiations and says both nations can reach an agreement before Trump's June 10th deadline. Well, a 5% tariff is set to be imposed unless Mexico meets as yet unspecified demands. CGTN's White House correspondent Nathan King reports.
As US President Trump left for Europe, the Mexican foreign minister flew into Washington, hopeful that despite US threats, a compromise can be found to avert tariffs and yet another one of Trump's trade wars.
Slapping tariffs, along with the decision to cancel the aid programs to the northern Central American countries, could have a counterproductive effect and would not reduce the migration flows. Tariffs could cause financial and economic instability, which means that Mexico could reduce its capacity to address migration flows and to offer alternatives to the new migrants who have recently arrived in Mexico.
The US president has been frustrated with the lack of success he's had in tackling illegal migration. A key campaign pledge to build a wall along the southern border and have Mexico pay for it has failed, and draconian immigration policies have led to a spike in detained immigrants, including children held for long periods of time. There have been several deaths, and there's also been a spike of asylum seekers travelling from Guatemala and Honduras. While Trump will be out of the country for the negotiations, he tweeted before he left, "Mexico is sending a big delegation to talk about the border. Problem is, they've been talking for 25 years. We want action, not talk. They could solve the border crisis in one day if they so desired. Otherwise, our companies and jobs are coming back to the USA." US businesses don't agree with their president. They know that any tariffs will hit the US side of the border hard and could upset complex supply chains from autos to avocados.
Our first goal is to persuade the administration that this is the wrong approach, that it goes against his top legislative priority and ours, USMCA, that the negative impact that it will have on the economy won't solve the problem at the border, and to kind of get off tariffs and onto other solutions.
Legal challenges are expected against this latest move. Never before has a US president used emergency powers to try and impose tariffs to stem the flow of illegal migration. However, this is familiar, this move, to countries whose products, from everything from cell phones to cars, are now somehow considered a threat to US national security. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.
Well, let's move on to Russia now. The country is positioned as Europe's biggest retail market, and it is betting on tourism to drive growth amidst global economic uncertainty. Well, our Xia Cheng is in St. Petersburg, a major tourist hub, and of course Russia's second largest city, to find out how authorities there are planning to attract more international tourists and spending in Russia.
Tourism is at the center of reviving Russia's economy and, more crucially, improving its image overseas. Russia saw a 10% surge in international tourist arrivals last year, dominated by visitors from China, Germany, and South Korea seeking value for money and attending the FIFA games. To keep the momentum, Russia needs a cash boost in infrastructure investment. Russia is building its first train in the Arctic region for foreign tourists, and Aeroflot's new Siberian terminal will be a transit hub for Chinese visitors. And these are the ways to utilize Russia's unique position as the largest retail market in Europe.
Doing this, we understand that we need to gain a lot of tourists, and we need to build connections with the core markets. And China, of course, for us, we see it now that this is a core market for us, Beijing and all other major Chinese cities.
Better business climate has strengthened Russia's hotel, restaurant, and retail sectors, which bodes well for the overall tourism revenues. But the low profit margin of tourism business remains a headache due to high tax, inefficient service delivery, and costly financial burden. That's a blow on Russian tourism's competitiveness, facing increasing competition from Turkey. Another issue is the general lack of knowledge about Russia's tourism destinations. As FIFA 2018 turned out to be a successful marketing campaign for Russia, the country is eyeing for more spending from sports fans in Europe's largest retail market.
Next year, for example, we are holding this 2020 UEFA games and Europe Champions Leagues now in the middle of negotiation. Then I think we will participate also. So we have every format, every segment which we attract.
Xia Cheng, CGTN, St. Petersburg.
Now, one farm's ambition to supply vegetables for Qatar's 2.6 million people is now becoming a reality. Qatar Agricultural Development Company has established a farm in the desert with the aim to reduce imports and boost local food production. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangari with more on that story.
Located in the Qatari desert, the farm offers a large field for production. The initiative was established following the economic embargo imposed on Qatar by its neighbors. This created a need to prioritize local food production.
After the blockade, it has now become a 24-hour job every day. We reclaimed vast surfaces of land and increased production, then tripled it from before the blockade. We used to produce from 7 to 8 to about 9 tons per season, but now we have reached about 30 tons per season.
Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Egypt cut direct flights, sea links and cross-border trade with the gas-rich emirate over alleged support for terrorism. This prompted creation of solutions, including irrigation in the desert. However, water is scarce and summer temperatures reach 50 degrees Celsius.
And the conditions in the Qatar, it's very harsh conditions, high temperature, high humidity. To overcome to these challenges is not easy. So you must have special techniques and special agriculture practice in order to overcome to these issues.
To overcome these challenges, special agriculture
houses, we have the new technology with retractable greenhouses, and we have also air conditioner system greenhouses. And it's very important to mention here, we are planting as a clean culture. That means we use the limited as we can the quantity of the chemicals. So you can see some insects, you can see some diseases, but you can see very healthy products as we can.
CADCO has invested $5.5 million to expand operations in support of the country's self-sufficiency drive. Vegetables on the market are now locally produced compared to just 12% in 2016. The company hopes to expand its number of greenhouses and arable fields by roughly 50% by 2020.
Yes, there is some extra production from varieties, some varieties like tomato, like cauliflower or cabbage or something else, but until now it's not allowed to export outside of Qatar according to the ministry. Before it was. So we are working, we have a contract, then we will go to stop the contracts in order to support more the local markets.
Qatar hopes to be 70% self-sufficient by 2023, and the government has set up a food security department to help achieve that goal. Progress has been striking, and the country has built dairy and poultry industries from scratch, going from importing 98% of its needs to looking at entering the export market. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
And on that note, let's take a look at how commodities performed today. Oil prices falling to their lowest since January, and that's on signs that an economic slowdown is starting to dent energy demand. Also, of course, Russia's top oil producer said it opposed extending joint cuts with OPEC until the end of the year. Meanwhile, gold prices hitting a more than 3-month high today as expectations rose that the US Fed will cut interest rates in order to offset the effect on growth of the US-China trade war, which of course is fueling demand right now. Well, let's take a quick break now. Here's a look at what's coming up. A Nigerian lady sets up an all-girls ICT school to empower women in technology.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN. See the difference.
Now, information technology is now a part of almost every career and profession, especially in developed countries. But here in Africa, women are up to 50% less likely than men to use the internet to increase their income or participate in public life. Well, a young Nigerian woman is now growing a generation of female tech experts through her school called the Smart Girls Tech Club. Well, CGTN's Feeling Haza filed this report from the nation's capital, Abuja.
Chineye Ude is the founder of Smart Girls Tech Club, an after-school learning center where young girls from the ages of 5 learn computer programming, artificial intelligence, robotics, and more. She says her dream is to improve the number of girls involved in information, communication, and technology in Nigeria.
Smart Girls Tech Team, we're trying to build this community where we can bridge the gap between what's happening in the workforce, where boys are more interested than girls in technology. So we are trying to see how we can make technology more interesting for the girls to participate.
According to the National Bureau of Statistics, women only make up roughly 20% of the total number of people specialized in the tech sector. The gender disparity is mainly due to a long-standing culture among many parents in Nigeria where education of female children is not a priority. However, with efforts from the likes of Ude and her team, there's been a gradual increase in female participation in science, technology, engineering and mathematics fields. These young girls are raised here to become highly skilled computer experts in the hope that they can help solve Nigeria's current and future problems through technology. Many of the girls are already dreaming of becoming the next big names in the global digital space.
Everybody knows Mark Zuckerberg, but no one knows any female coder. So I want to become one of the world's best-known female coders.
I lost my parents when I was young. I lived in an orphanage home, and I was selected among those people to learn Internet of Things. I want to change the world with technology.
However, the founder says more support from the government is required to boost female tech experts in the country.
I need government to sponsor things like this, Girls in Tech, Girls Project, build tech clubs, establishing clubs in schools that will promote girls in technology, facilities as well.
The club is looking to educate at least 1,000 young smart girls annually to help
entering a new era, and that's thanks to a startup called Azera, which is transforming old farms into digitized ones. Well, the company's digital tools make life easier for farmers in the country on a daily basis by enabling them to develop sustainable and competitive agriculture. Here's CGTN's Adnan Ashaushi with this story.
Yasser Boud is the co-founder and manager of Azera, a Tunisian software startup. The company's products aim to streamline agricultural management in Tunisia, Africa, and worldwide. The integrated software system manages agricultural inventory, labor, and operations.
In the past, a farmer could not evaluate the productivity of his farm. For example, one cannot know the cost rates and the price per kilogram of olives or grapes. Our app gives the exact cost.
The Tunis-based agronomist, along with his co-developers, have successfully created mobile technology that allows farmers to control irrigation from a cellular phone.
Water is very precious. It's becoming rare while farmers are not irrigating with the right quantities. Water irrigation management is now possible. It saves water, time and energy.
The disruptive technologies developed by Zeira have also enabled it to consolidate its regional leadership in the field of digital services dedicated to farmers.
Taste and price. Tunisia is an agricultural country where farmers lack financial and technical means to improve productivity and export agricultural produce abroad.
Agricultural big data, connected objects, cloud, software and electric robots are now part of the everyday lives of many farmers in Tunisia, thanks to Zeira. The startup has made its second fundraising up to $300,000. It will internationalize in Morocco, then Mali and Guinea.
As a pioneer in the field of smart agriculture in Tunisia, the technological startup Zeira is revolutionizing the traditional working methods of farmers in the country. The company also aims to distribute its products in sub-Saharan Africa. Aden Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, before we go, a quick look at Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand weakening more than 1% against the dollar, and that's following the announcement that first quarter GDP suffered its biggest drop since, of course, the financial crisis in 2009. Meanwhile, Kenya shilling firming up against the dollar, supported by inflows from diaspora remittances, and that's amid thin dollar demand coming in from oil importers. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and of course the rest of the team, thanks for watching.